If you're shopping while working, eating, or even listening to this podcast, then you know and love the thrill of a deal. But are you getting the deal and cash back? Rakuten shoppers do. They get the brands they love, savings, and cash back. And you can get it too. Start getting cash back at your favorite stores like Target, Sephora, and even Expedia. Stack sales on top of cash back and feel what it's like to know you're maximizing the savings. It's easy to use, and you get your cash back sent to you through PayPal or check. The idea is simple. Stores pay Rakuten for sending them shoppers, and Rakuten shares the money with you as cash back. Download the free Rakuten app or go to Rakuten.com to start saving today. It's the most rewarding way to shop. That's Rakuten, Rakuten.com.
Wild Planet is sustainable seafood the way nature provided it, because nothing beats wild. Wild is pole and line-caught, hand-cut, and hand-packed tuna. It's small fish like sardines and anchovies that are lower on the food chain and help to preserve ocean habitats. It's less processing and more delicious, clean nutrients, like 33 grams of protein in a serving of Wild Planet albacore tuna. What's wild tastes better and is better for the planet, which is why we ask you to go wild. Wild caught, wild enjoyed, Wild Planet. Wild Planet premium canned seafood is available at major retailers nationwide.
The amazing Kate Casey.
Welcome back for another episode of Reality Life with Kate Casey. Today's episode is about the Netflix documentary Unknown Number, The High School Catfish. Later in the show, you're going to hear my interview with a leading cybersecurity expert. But first, I'm going to walk you through the twists and turns of this unusual case. Fair warning, there are spoilers ahead. If you haven't yet watched the documentary, you may want to hit pause and come back after you've seen it. In the middle of Michigan farmland, where the horizon is cut by silos and church steeples, sits Beale City. It's not a town so much as a patchwork stitched together by one intersection, two bars, and the steady rhythm of Friday night lights. Here, last names carry weight. Stories are passed like heirlooms. And the center of it all is a single brown brick schoolhouse, kindergarten through senior year, where each grade is small enough to fit into a single team photo. It was in that school in the fall of 7th grade that a boy named Owen McKenney worked up the nerve to send Lauren LeCarry a message. He had just gotten his first cell phone, one of the last in his class to do so. Lauren, an athlete with a quiet presence, tomboyish in hoodies and jerseys, blonde hair braided neatly over her crown, caught his attention immediately. She stood out, Owen would later say. Pretty, athletic, kind. Like any 7th grade romance, it began with whispered nudges from friends and a text after a football game. So are we dating? Owen typed. And she replied, I don't know. Do you want to be? And with that, they were. But by January of 2022, those innocent exchanges would bring both families into the principal's office. Now, the McKenneys were Beale City legacy. Dave and Jill had started dating in 7th grade themselves. Dave, once a star outfielder for the Aggies, was the kind of hometown athlete that people still remembered, and his wife Jill had been a cheerleader and later the tireless parent volunteer at the Catholic school. So together, they were the archetype of small-town roots. Dave was coaching kids' baseball on the side, and Jill was the familiar face at every fundraiser. But the LeCarrys were different. Kendra had grown up 2 hours east, closer to Detroit than the Plains. At Central Michigan University, she met her husband, Sean, a Beale City alum who had lured her back to his hometown into a modest one-story house and into a community that was not hers by birthright. Their only child, their daughter Lauren, was everything to her. A quiet girl, yes, but her mom, Kendra, was anything but. A former athlete herself, she coached her daughter's softball and basketball teams. And she'd tag along for the spring break caravans that sent Beale families south each year. And she could often be found in the middle of student gossip circles. Parents whispered that she wanted Lauren's life to sparkle as brightly as her own had not. She took great effort to brag about all of her daughter's achievements. Sometimes they said she seemed almost too invested in her daughter's romance with Owen, as though she believed the children were fated to follow the same path as Owen's parents. Now, once a classmate saw Kendra take Lauren's phone and read her daughter's text with Owen, And she responded with a stunning reply, "I love you." Once COVID began, the two families spent more time together. And the next year, Kendra signed up to coach Owen's track team. She was a regular spectator at Owen's matches and drove Lauren 3 hours across Michigan to watch one of his championship games. The craziest part is Owen referred to her as almost a second mom. Then the messages began, a torrent of anonymous texts, and sometimes 30 to 50 in a single day, flooding their phones like a poison that they couldn't turn off. And they came at all hours. They were late at night, in the middle of class, and they were always from a new number and always cruel, and no one knew who was sending them. The text hit both Owen and Lauren. The brunt of the cruelty really fell on her. And whoever was behind the screen seemed to know her soft spots, including her private doubts. They sneered at her thin frame, calling her an anorexic toddler with little Tyke's body. And they mocked her basketball skills, celebrating when she scored only a few points. The bully whispered poison into her relationship too, insisting Owen was trashing her behind her back, and that he was flirting with other girls now that their middle school romance had fizzled. And what made it chilling was how much the texters seemed to know. They would describe the exact shirt Lauren wore to school that day. They'd track her stats on the basketball court and even taunted her about Owen swapping out the phone case that she'd once given him. The text seemed to come from a peer, and they also called Lauren by Lo, which was a nickname that only close friends and family used. They started out simple, but they were emotionally manipulative, sowing confusion and doubt. "Hi, Lauren. Owen is breaking up with you. He will be with me while your lonely, ugly ass is alone." Or before homecoming, "Could this be the end of the AKA golden couple with a relationship everyone idolizes?" Or some just on a regular day. "You're the definition of a perfect couple and will be forever a couple that gets married, but some of us don't want to hear it anymore." And then the messages began to become more deeply sexual and demeaning, meant to insult and humiliate Lauren. "He wants sex, BJ's, making out. He don't want your sorry ass." And then disturbingly more graphic, language that would make adults wince. And then worst of all, suicide encouragement and death threats. "Kill yourself now, B. His life would be better if you were dead." But then there was a possible crack. One night, the bully gloated about scoring 12 points in a basketball game. At the sheriff's urging, Kendra, who often ran the varsity scoreboards, slipped out of the room to pull the records. There was only one player that had put up 12 points, Chloe Wilson, a popular freshman who had grown up on the same court as Lauren. And for the first time, the faceless shadow seemed to have a name. Was it Chloe Wilson? Lauren and Owen would call the unknown number, but no one would ever pick up at the other end. And there was the question of, why didn't they just change their numbers? Well, the sender used an app to mask their phone number and cycle through new ones, making blocking and tracing nearly impossible. This technical barrier made changing or discarding their phone seem ineffective at stopping the messages. And then instead of enforcing practical safety measures like phone changes, authorities encouraged them to just ignore the messages. And then, of course, Owen's mother attempted to limit his access to phones at school, but she was met with resistance. The principal referred to phones as a quote-unquote learning tool, prioritizing school policy over mental health concerns. So after 2 years of dating, Lauren and Owen broke up. But the messages continued. "He already chose us, not you. He won't be with you this weekend, so don't even ask. Maybe you shouldn't have picked cross country over him. You proved he isn't important to you. We were there, though. You don't get with him in bed. You don't sneak out with him. You effing dress awful. Ain't no guy want that." For months, the messages kept coming, each one crueler, darker, and more impossible to trace. The bully was hiding behind technology, using those apps that mask phone numbers, cycling through new ones every time, and even with blocking, even with vigilance, the text always returned. To Lauren and Owen, it felt like the sender could be anyone, anywhere. But even ghosts leave footprints. So when the local police hit a dead end, the FBI cybercrime team stepped in. They issued subpoenas to the anonymous texting app and then to Verizon. On the surface, the data looked like chaos. Dozens of numbers, IP addresses bouncing across servers, and all pointing nowhere. But buried deep in those records was a pattern, a single device ID that kept showing up. Every trail, every number, every text led back to one phone. And that phone belonged to Kendra LeCarry. This was the same mother who had been sitting in on school meetings, consoling her daughter and demanding answers from investigators. She was the very person sending the messages. When officers arrived at her home in December of 2022, they confronted her with the evidence. And on body cam footage, you can hear the moment that the mask dropped. No excuses, no elaborate lies, just a quiet, devastating admission. It was me. The bully was not a stranger, not a jealous classmate, not some faceless figure online. It was her own mother. Kendra was surprisingly cooperative with the police, and Lauren stayed close to her mother, quiet and then hugging her. For Sean LeCarry, the reveal was devastating. Imagine sitting beside your wife at meetings believing she was fighting for your daughter's safety, only to find out she was the one behind every single message. In the documentary, he admits that he was blindsided. He had trusted her, supported her, and never once suspected that the harassment his daughter was enduring had been orchestrated from inside their home. So as the McKennies sat beside her in the principal's office, as her daughter wept beside her, countless conversations with her frantic husband, and the endless conversations with investigators, the very person orchestrating the harassment, Kendra, was right there in plain sight. She attended meetings, she pushed for updates, she even coached Lauren on how to handle this unrelenting harassment. And this allowed the situation to continue to be unchallenged and unmitigated, and could have potentially pushed her own daughter to make a life-ending decision. In reflection, Kendra tried to explain what had happened. Realistically, a lot of us have broken the law at some point or another and not gotten caught. I'm sure people drove drunk, haven't been caught. To her, these weren't months of calculated torment. They were just mistakes. But the reality is Kendra had time for this because she wasn't working. Now, she was the perceived breadwinner, that according to Sean. But the documentary reveals she hadn't simply quit her job, as she had said. She had been let go. And instead of finding new employment, she just faked it. She pretended to be working while her family quietly slid into financial stress. That secret double life gave her long stretches of time to keep up with the relentless messages. Now, she had said that she had childhood trauma. Was it a deep-seated psychological issue that drove her behavior rather than a single tidy motive? Her cousin did suggest it was her constant need for attention. Or was there something deeper driving her obsession? Owen and his mother, Jill, began to wonder if Kendra was actually attracted to him. Owen remembers how she'd cut up a steak into bite-sized pieces as if they were a child, and how she'd pull him aside, asking him one-on-one how he was doing, and how she never stopped showing up at his games, and that was even after he and Lauren had broken up. Prosecutors and experts likened her behavior to cyber Munchausen syndrome, a digital twist on Munchausen by proxy where a caregiver creates psychological or physical distress in a child to evoke attention and maintain a controlling caregiving role. Isabella County prosecutor David Barberi expressed that it seemed Kendra manufactured the crisis so her daughter would feel dependent on her, a dynamic that positioned Kendra as essential in her daughter's emotional life. Some theories suggest that as Lauren grew closer to her boyfriend and more independent, Kendra may have felt replaced or threatened, and by instigating the crisis, she could regain emotional control and force dependency on herself. Kendra LeCarry was held legally accountable and pled guilty in March 2023 to 2 felony counts of stalking a minor. A minor, by the way, that was her own child. In exchange for her plea, other charges, including using a computer to commit a crime and obstruction of justice, were dropped. In April of 2023, she was sentenced to 19 months to 5 years in prison, reflecting the severity of her psychological abuse and betrayal of trust. Kendra appealed her sentence, but in December of 2023, the Michigan Court of Appeals denied the appeal, affirming the original ruling. She was released on parole on August 8, 2024. As of the documentary's latest reports, she remains on parole and is no longer permitted contact with her daughter, Lauren. So on today's episode, my guest is Michael Greer. Deputy Homeland Security Chief and respected technology expert. With over 20 years of experience as a special agent of the Department of Justice and the FBI, where he focused on cybersecurity and terrorism, Michael brings a wealth of knowledge to this conversation. We discussed the intricacies of the forensic investigation and how Kendra was able to evade discovery, as well as the high-stakes challenges investigators face when following digital trails. Here is my interview with Michael Greer.
It's your man, Nick Cannon, and I'm here to bring you my new podcast, Nick Cannon at Night. I've heard y'all been needing some advice in the love department. So who better to help than yours truly? Nah, I'm serious. Every week, I'm bringing out some of my celebrity friends and the best experts in the business to answer your most intimate relationship questions. Having problems with your man? We got you. Catching feelings for your sneaky link? Let's make sure it's the real deal first. Ready to bring toys into the bedroom? Let's talk about it. Consider this a non-judgment zone to ask your questions when it comes to sex and modern dating in relationships, friendships, situationships, and everything in between. It's gonna be sexy, freaky, messy, and you know what? You'll just have to watch the show. So don't be shy. Join the conversation and head over to YouTube to watch Nick Cannon at Night or subscribe on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. Wanna watch episodes early and ad-free? Join Wondery Plus right now.
How hard is it to kill a planet? Maybe all it takes is a little drilling, some mining, and a whole lot of carbon pumped into the atmosphere. When you see what's left, it starts to look like a crime scene.
Are we really safe? Is our water safe? You destroyed our town.
And crimes like that, they don't just happen.
We call things accidents. There is no accident. This was 100% preventable.
They're the result of choices by people. Ruthless oil tycoons, corrupt politicians, even organized crime. These are the stories we need to be telling about our changing planet. Stories of scams, murders, and cover-ups that are about us and the things we're doing to either protect the Earth or destroy it. Follow Lawless Planet on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to new episodes of Lawless Planet early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify.
Mike, it is a pleasure to meet you, and I'm so grateful to have you today because this story is really rattling the people who watch Netflix. I mean, this is a conversation starter, to say the least. So the first question I have for you is if you could explain in layman's terms how IP tracing works in investigations.
Okay, sure. IP tracing basically is a way for investigators and non-investigators to try to figure out where a particular electronic communication comes from, whether it be a text or an email. Basically, anything electronic is going to send their message. If it's a computer, it's going to go via TCP/IP protocol, and it's going to have an IP address that resolves back to an internet service provider that you have to connect to get on the internet. The difference with this would be if you're at a coffee shop or somewhere where you have free Wi-Fi, you're not on your own ISP, you're on the borrowed ISP that's letting you get on their network for free. So the IP address is unique to each computer that gets on, at least from that access point. And what happens in investigations, when you find an IP address, you will determine the general location, and then you will go to that internet service provider with legal process. That's how investigators do it anyway. And then they can identify the actual owner of that particular IP address versus, say, a block from Spectrum cable that has hundreds of different IP addresses within a specific range. So sorry if that's a little long-winded, but there's a lot to it with the IP addresses. So
are there some limitations on relying on IP addresses as evidence?
Yes, you can't really use it. You can use that as a basis to get legal process. It's the way we used to do it always in my investigations. We would get an IP address from a particular a bad guy, a threat actor, or whatever you want to call them. We would then go to our U.S. attorney, would get a subpoena to go to the internet service provider to find out the owner of that specific IP address on the date and time of that particular communication. Let's, for instance, say there was an email. Every email you send has a header that you can't really see unless you open up the headers, and it has all the routing information. So it starts with the individual sender's IP address, and it goes all the way down through all the little hops it made to the internet service provider. So we would get the last IP, the one that's supposedly from the guy who sent it or the gal. Then we would subpoena the ISP for the actual owner of that IP on that specific date and time. Without that information, you can't prove who actually owned that. And even with that, you can't prove a particular person was sitting at that computer. So you have to do a little more investigative work.
So what more investigative work do you have to do? Because it does seem like it would be hard to confirm that the person behind the IP address is the actual person that is responsible for the activity, because there could be more than one person at an address or a building.
The way we would do it, we would try to corroborate with other communications. So once you know an IP address that you think is a bad one, coming from a bad threat actor, then you can, there's many different ways as far as it depends on how intrusive you want to be and how much legal authority you have to do these things. But you can start intercepting communications from that IP that will further corroborate the owner of that IP. Say they don't only use that IP to send the threatening email or the phishing scam. They also might use that to do their online banking or communicate with family members. So you try to corroborate the owner of that IP through other communications. Further down the road, when you have a pretty good idea of who you think it is, we'll do a search warrant. Then we go in and we do an interview, and we determine who owns the computer, who has access, how many logins are there, things like that. And you have to kind of whittle through all those little nuances to actually get to who might have been behind the keyboard when the bad activity happened.
Is it almost like you have to match up the times, like in sync?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. The times are always date stamp determines everything. And you have to make sure you get it right with your time zone. As if, for instance, you're in California, I'm in North Carolina. So you subpoena Spectrum and you don't have the EST or the PST or, whatever the time zone might be, you're going to get a completely wrong set of IP results from that subpoena. So you have to really know where you think your threat actor is when you do these subpoenas.
Well, when you submit the subpoena, do you have luck with that? Because I was just thinking about the Koberger case, and in that case, Google was subpoenaed, and that helped in their investigation.
Generally, it had a lot. I mean, at least in my time in the FBI, we had a lot of luck with subpoenas because the CALEA Act, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, Computer Assistance in Law Enforcement Act, kind of requires any ISP to cooperate to a certain degree. Obviously, you've seen the news about Apple not cooperating and giving the FBI the back door into certain devices. That's not covered under the CALEA Act, but the CALEA Act really covers anybody who provides ISP type service, who provides routing and things like that to cooperate with legal process through the FBI or other law enforcement agencies who are official business. And we had really good luck when I was in. I know there's a lot of things in the news, but typically, at least at the level of getting subpoena results and getting, owners of IP addresses, we always had very good luck with that.
So in this case, it's complicated, and it makes me wonder how offenders attempt to mask their own identity online, and how effective are those methods against modern tracing techniques?
They're very effective, and that's the biggest impediment to law enforcement now is that you don't have to be a computer hacker to go out and Google anonymize my IP. And basically, like for instance, you can use an anonymizer, which is a free free service. You can Google it and find 20 of them right now. And basically, some of those you pay for, some you don't. And what they'll do is they'll take your IP and they'll mask it and they'll use an IP that you select from anywhere in the world. You can say, I want to come from Iraq today, and they will just spoof the IP, and then that's your IP on that communication. That's the anonymizer side. Another impediment is most people who are doing covert activity and things they don't want to get caught at, they're going to use a VPN, virtual private network, so that you're not going to get that IP. You're going to get spoofed results somewhere else, and it's going to get you to a certain place again, wherever they select to come from. That's where your hop will end. You're not going to get back to the internet service provider because it's all virtual private and it's encrypted and you're not going to get to it. So those two are major impediments to investigative work for online activity.
Is it impossible to find out a culprit if they use the VPN?
It depends on where the VPN host is. Sometimes we can use legal process if it's a U.S. based or a friendly U.S. country that's providing the service. Generally, really bad actors are not going to use VPNs that they think might give up their information. So it can be impossible. There are certain instances where you can find it, but it takes a lot of effort to get to a real IP through a VPN.
So for this case, is there anything that stood out for you in terms of the investigative perspective?
Yeah, I think as always, when it involves teenage kids, they don't even think about adults doing this. They just assume it's, friends and enemies that you made in school for whatever reason that are doing this activity back and forth. And the fact that they were able to get back to the mom's device means that she's not a very savvy online threat, because they immediately, once the law enforcement got involved and they were able to do the legal process, they identified exactly where these were coming from. And it wasn't a very difficult case once they actually focused their attention and got legal process on the actual communications and the IP addresses.
No, I kind of felt like from the beginning that at some point someone was going to assume that the mom had to have been involved. And maybe I have confirmation bias because I've already, watched this whole documentary and I, kind of knew the ending. But it struck me as like her behavior was so odd in so many ways. Because you kind of see this stuff all the time, were you immediately thinking as you read it and researched this story, the enforcement agencies should have immediately looked at the parent? Or are we still living in a time where people would never assume the parent, to your earlier point?
I think it's still the point, and I have children still in school, and I know as school resource officers are with those people a lot, and they see this activity, they see the bullying, they see the back and forth with kids at school, and they're there to prevent that in person, but they can't really do the electronic eavesdropping that's necessary. And I think it really is. I think it's bias on the law enforcement and the parents' part to just always assume that the teenager is wrong. And I'm probably guilty of that same bias on occasion as well. But it strikes me that they didn't even consider, just to rule the mom and dad out. First thing you can do is rule them out real quickly by searching their IPs and making sure that's not coming from someone within the home.
Is there anything that stood out for you as a challenge to investigators?
Yeah, the challenge is always just trying to narrow down your suspect pool. In this case, they had hundreds, maybe several hundred kids at the school that could have been suspects. Many of those kids are very tech savvy, and probably half of them are using anonymizers. I know my children a few years ago in high school, they had everything blocked unless you had a VPN to get out, and then they figured out real quick, just put it on a VPN and you can still do your social media during school. So everything that you do to try to prevent some of this, kids are pretty tech savvy, much more than their parents these days, and they'll find a way. But I think at the end of the day, hindsight is always 20/20, but they could have easily eliminated some of the low-hanging fruit by just eliminating people in the home. Because, if you go to a crime scene where a spouse has been killed or abused or whatever, but the first suspect is always the spouse, right? It's always right. You always start in the home because those are the most likely people that are going to do things like that. So I think as this progresses like this, and you see cases more like the one you're talking about, law enforcement might make that a standard practice, is just to eliminate the family first instead of going through hundreds and hundreds of other kids to try to figure this out.
How do law enforcement agencies then balance the privacy rights with the need to track down offenders using IP and digital data?
There's really, when you sign all the agreements that nobody ever reads with your ISP, and, you lose your privacy rights online as soon as you go to a public website, right? You don't have an expectation of privacy there. You do have an expectation of privacy with your connection info, which is that IP address. And for us to get that the legal way, I mean, it's going to take a judge to sign off on we're going to have a U.S. attorney sign off on a subpoena and or a judge to sign off on a search warrant for the content of that account. The big difference between these investigations is the subpoena is just transactional data for IP addresses and connection times, right? So that's a U.S. attorney can sign off on that. If we're going to do anything content related, things they actually typed in or attached or did online other than connect, then you have to have a full search warrant and you have to have probable cause to get that warrant. So in my opinion, and again, I'm biased because I'm a retired FBI agent, the privacy issue is a non-factor because we can't get to any of that without legal process if you're doing it the legal way. Now, crafty tech people out there and dark web and this and that, they find ways around some of this, but to do it in the legal way that's going to stand up in a court of law later, if you're trying to prosecute someone, you have to do these legal documents to make it work.
Well, my last question is, what lessons can parents and schools learn from this unusual case in terms of recognizing early signs of digital harassment?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is just recognizing it because, it goes on a lot and a lot of kids hide this. Once this little girl brought it to the attention of people, then I think that should have really gotten the school and the parents. Obviously, the mom was not interested in figuring this out, but they should have gotten the school more heavily involved in this. And I know they went to the school resource officer and they tried a few different ways before they figured out ultimately that it was her mother. But, it's just always, opening your aperture up to where you're not just looking at the kids, because it's not always just the kids. You go to the family, go to extended folks that they might know away from campus, right? So,
or like an older sibling who may have gone to school with them years before, or an uncle or something. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think if they just, to eliminate the people closest to the victim, I think is a good practice. And then you can open it up to everyone else that's out there.
And you had mentioned that there is a resource that people can use to really embolden themselves, to empower themselves in terms of protecting their information online.
Yes. So if you go to Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, go to their website, and they have tons of tutorials, videos, documents, PDFs about how to keep your mobile device safe, how to keep your personal devices safe at home, how to do online banking correctly, how to set up multi-factor authentication. A lot of these things will prevent a lot of the online scams and a lot of the harassing and things like that if you just take a few minutes to harden up your environment. And it's a really good resource if you go out there and take a look.
So there's someone listening and their child is beginning this process of getting harassing texts. What's the first thing that they should do?
First and foremost, save every one of those texts so that you can use those to go report this to your local law enforcement. I would go, I would do the chain of command. Obviously, I would go to my school resource officer if there is one available with your parents, right? Take the parents with you. School resource officer is going to do some things at that point, which will probably start the local law enforcement, whichever agency that SRO is with, to put this on their radar. They may not open an investigation right away because, again, there are a lot of these things going on and they don't warrant full police interaction. But you got to start somewhere. And if this isn't resolved easily by an SRO going to another student and saying cease and desist this behavior, then at least you have it on the radar and the local law enforcement can they get involved. And then once they're involved, you can jump up again to the FBI if you need to. I mean, it opens up a lot of doors. You just got to do the official channels, which to me would be the SRO and the parents, first and foremost.
And it's important because in this case, the family kind of of course, because she's involved, but I think collectively the Lacaries, but also the school kind of brushed it off like, just ignore it. If you ignore it, it'll go away. But I think what this case and what you're highlighting is you have to get on top of it right away.
And there's one other resource I would bring up. I'm a Verizon customer, but AT&T has it. Basically, all of your mobile providers will have this for for your mobile devices for your teens and your preteens and the younger, individuals in your family. They have all kinds of parental controls out there. You can set up, geofencing where, if they leave a certain area, you can set up times where the phone's cut off. You can set up to be sent every picture they send. There's a lot of things you can do as the owner of that device, as the parent. And you can just set that up. And, with my children, we always have an agreement that your phone is my phone. So you have no expectation of privacy on the phone. I'm going to have your code and I'm going to look at it anytime I want. And that will deter a lot of the craziness online. So,
well, I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you for all that you do to protect everyone. And congratulations on a great career.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
I want to thank my fantastic guest, Michael Greer, and remind you to make sure that you click subscribe to this podcast. And if you would leave a 5-star review, I would love for you to join the Facebook group, Reality Life with Kate Casey, so we can talk further about this episode. You can also get bonus episodes by going to Apple Podcasts and on Patreon at patreon.com/Kate Casey. And make sure that you get my What to Watch list by going to katecasey.substack.com. You will get a list every week of what to watch in unscripted TV. And lastly, make sure that you follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram at KatecaseyCA, TikTok, it's Katecasey, and Twitter, Threads, and Blue Sky at Katecasey. Check back tomorrow for an all-new episode.